is to blur background in Photoshop. You don't really have to do any complicated selections, and you honestly don't need that much experience in the program, because with some recent updates in the program, you can use something called neural filters as well as the AI selection methods just to make life really easy. So in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through all of the steps to do just that, and we're going to add an awesome new background blur to this photo that looks pretty close to how it would look if we had a wider aperture and a more shallow depth of field. Now, of course, this doesn't perfectly replace the look of a wider aperture, but it's going to get you pretty darn close, and it's the best you can do once you're in the post-processing phase. So let's get into Photoshop and see how it all works. Hello friends, hope you're doing well today. My name is Brent from BeWellCreative.com, and this is the photo we're going to be working with today. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a background blur already, but I'd love to increase that and just make it a little more, majestic, if you will. Now, the first thing we're going to do is duplicate our image layer 2 times. So with our image layer selected, we'll press Command or Control J once and then twice. So I'm going to call this top one to subject and the bottom layer to background. Now with my subject layer selected, I'm going to go and access my quick selection tool just by pressing W on my keyboard, and then in the options bar to speed up this whole process, we're going to press select subject. This will automatically create a selection of your subject and just save a lot of work. Now to remove the background, we're going to add a layer mask to our subject layer. So now if I'm just viewing that one layer, she's on a transparent background. Now as you can see, there are some areas here that need to be touched up, but we can worry about that later on in the process. That's the beauty of working with layer masks here, because we can always go back and adjust them. For now, we're going to go on to the next step of editing the background layer. Now what we need to do before we add a blur is we need to remove our subject from the background, because if you leave your subject on the background layer, when you go to blur everything, parts of your subject will be visible on the outside of them, and then you'll get this ghosting, haloing effect that just doesn't look good. So we can use Content Aware Fill to remove our subject super easily. To do that, we need to first create a selection of our subject once again, but we've already done that. So to save time, if you hold Command or Control and click on your subject layer mask, it'll reactivate that selection for you. Now clicking on our background layer, I'm going to right click inside of this selection and go down here to Content Aware Fill. Now I've talked about Content Aware Fill more in depth in another tutorial about removing things in Photoshop, but in a nutshell, what it does is it takes all of those areas highlighted in green and tries to use that as a sample to replace your selection. So here in my preview, you can see how this green area is being used to replace what was once my subject. Now if I zoom in on the preview, you can see how there's still some edges of my subject visible, and that's going to make things look pretty terrible when we go and do the background blur. So we need to expand our selection outwards so that we don't get any of these edges anymore from our subject. To do that really easily, up in the options bar, I'm going to set my pixels to 5, and then I'll click expand. That's going to move my selection outwards by 5 pixels. We'll then take another look at our preview here. And at this point, you might have gotten rid of all of the edges, but in my case, I still have some hair here. So I'm going to press expand one more time. And now just to do one more, set this to 2, and press expand once more. Now that all of the edges of our subject are gone within our preview, that means that we have a good enough background. And obviously at this point, it does not fill anything in, and this looks super terrible because like the car isn't being extended or anything like that. But you have to remember that we have a subject that's going to be blocking all of that, and it's going to be blurred out. So once we do those two things, you won't even notice that this is kind of messed up. So with all of this good to go, I'm going to set my output to current layer, which means it will apply to our background layer, and I'll click OK. Now, if I look at my background layer, you can see that Content Aware Fill is applied, and I'll press Command or Control D to deselect it. Now, before we keep going, if you're enjoying the tutorial so far and you're learning something new, make sure to hit that like button down below to let me know. Now we need to go and add our background blur. With our background layer selected, we're going to first convert it into a smart object by right-clicking and going to Convert Smart Object. The reason for this is so once we add our if you want to go back and edit them, you can do so. If you don't convert your layer to a smart object, you're pretty much applying it straight onto the layer and you won't be able to edit it again. Anyways, now that my layer is converted, I'm going to go to Filter and down here to Neural Filters. There's quite a few options that I definitely recommend exploring if you have some time, but we're going to go straight to Depth Blur, which is the one that we're looking for. I'll go ahead and turn that filter on, and now that will start to add a background blur onto our photo, or our background layer in this case, because our subject layer is already separated. Now I want to set our focal length, meaning I want to tell tell Photoshop where is our subject and what else can be blurred. So the foreground, midground, and background is. We can do that by clicking on the focal point window here, and that will set a point right about where her feet are in the photo. From there, I can increase the blur strength just by moving the slider depending on the look that you're going for. And then you can also adjust the intensity of the blur by moving the focal range, because that will just help to change the depth of field that you have on your photo. Since I want to have a more dramatic blur, I'll leave this down at 0, and I'll keep the blur strength up nice and high, like so. You'll also notice that there are a few sliders here that you can adjust the color temperature or the saturation and just very basic adjustments of your background if you'd like to, but a lot of the stuff you can do just with an adjustment layer. And to me, it makes more sense to use an adjustment layer just because you can have a little more control rather than just a few basic sliders like this. But for the sake of example, I'll add a little bit of warmth here and I'll call it a day. So now that's looking pretty good to me. I'm happy with that background blur, and I'll click OK. Now you'll see in my layers panel that my background layer has a smart filter, which is the neural filter. So if you wanted to go and edit your background blur at time, you can go and click on that neural filter. Now at this point you might be thinking, man, what the heck is this guy doing? Look at all this stuff he left around her. This looks terrible. You're right, you are right. So let's touch that up. And that's the beauty of layer masks. And the reason I saved this for last is because it just makes life a little easier. All the other effects are done, so then we can just touch things up as needed based on our final edit. So because we have applied a layer mask, this is going to be really easy to do. With that, I'm going to grab my brush tool by pressing B. Now we can go and mask out all of this unwanted area around her hair. In the world of layer masks, white is 100% visible while black is 100% transparent. So that means we need to have black set to our foreground color, and then we can just go and paint over the edges with a nice soft brush. So I'm going to set my hardness to 0%, and I'm just going to paint over the edge of her hair just to smooth things out a little bit. Now in a moment I will be adding back in some strands of hair, so just bear with me as I do this one little adjustment here. I'll go to the other side of her body and then just mask out this unwanted area as well. And if you're going along an edge and you're having a hard time making that precise adjustment, I guess, you can just use a harder brush and that will just make life a bit easier for you. So now with all of those unwanted areas touched up and removed, let's go and add back some hair to our subject. Of course, if you don't have any hair in your photo, you can skip this step and congrats, you're done. But I'm going to show you this last little thing here. I'm going to create a new layer, and then I'm going to make my brush really small, like 1 pixel small. Then I'm going to set the hardness somewhere around 50%. With those brush settings in place, we can basically paint in individual strands of hair, which sounds time consuming, and it kind of is, but it's worthwhile for the results that you get. Now, if you have an editing tablet, it's going to make life a lot easier because you can use pen pressure to make either end of the strands of hair actually look realistic, but you can do this with a mouse. It's just going to be a little bit harder. If you're interested in editing tablets, I share some of my favorites over on my website, and I'll leave a link for that article down below in the description. Anyways, with my brush tool selected, I'm going to hold Alt-Option and sample a color of the hair, and I'll just paint over on the outside on my new layer to add some strands of hair in. Now, as you can see, it's really subtle, but the more you paint over, you start to get these realistic strands that appear. And because we have that really small brush size, I'm just painting over multiple times to get the look that we're going for. And the beauty of all this is that hair is random, so you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be an amazing artist. You just have to be able to draw a squiggly line, which I think we can all do. As you go, it's a good idea to resample your color, so then you just get a more realistic look of the hair, because hair isn't just one color. It's usually a bunch of different ones. Now, I should also mention, if you are using your editing tablet, just make sure that the pen pressure sensitivity option is enabled in the options bar up above. Otherwise, it won't really make a difference whether you're using a mouse or a